Angela Merkel giving new weight to her view that Europe can no longer completely rely on the U.S. the way it once did. Merkel restating her concern about U.S. reliability at a speech in Berlin one day after saying her eyes had been opened by her experience at NATO and G7 meetings with President Trump.
Wir sind überzeugte Transatlantiker.
We are convinced transatlanticists, and precisely because we are, we know that transatlantic relations are of immense importance for us all. They rest on mutual values and interests, particularly when we are in times as we are now, of intense challenges. But the last few days showed me that the days where we could completely rely on others are over.
Germany's foreign minister taking an even harsher tone, saying President Trump has, quote, weakened the West, accusing the U.S. of standing against the interests of the European Union. I want to sort through the European reaction here. Senior international correspondent Frederick Pleiken is in London. And Fred, how is all of this being received by the Europeans? Do they agree with Angela Merkel?
Well, I would say most of them, Christine, do agree with Angela Merkel. If you look to France, for instance, you saw some similar comments coming from the French president as well. The Brits take a little bit of a different view. They're just leaving the European Union in the next 2 years, so they're looking for closer ties with America. But most of the continental Europeans, they probably feel the same things. And one of the interesting things that Angela Merkel said, for instance, on this climate deal that Jeff Zeleny was just talking about, she says that in the G7 countries, so the biggest economies in the world, there's basically a 6-to-1 situation right now where all of them want to have the climate deal continue, but the U.S. still isn't sure about its position. So that's one thing. And then you have NATO, where obviously President Trump last week made some comments that really a lot of Europeans didn't want to hear. On the one hand, saying that the U.S. was paying too much, Europeans were paying too little, but at the same time, they were missing a full commitment that the U.S. was committed to the security of European nations. And I think that's really what prompted Angela Merkel to say what she said. And so there certainly is a lot of frustration in Europe about some of the things coming out of the White House.
An interesting story in the Wall Street Journal, an opinion piece, Fred, this morning. Essentially, here's the last line. The Atlantic Alliance might even benefit from more such candid talk on both sides. Is there any sentiment that maybe some self-reliance on the behalf of Europe and Germany it's time for?
Yeah, you know what, I think that to a certain extent might be true. I mean, one of the things that is certainly a fact is that many European countries have been spending far too little on defense, as far as America is concerned, but also as far as they themselves are concerned, the commitment that they've made as well. You take, for instance, a country like Germany, which by far is the largest economy in Europe. They're supposed to spend 2% of their annual budget on defense. Right now they're at 1.2%, and they keep saying they can't really boost defense spending that much that quickly. But it's one of the things that has led to frustrations, not just with the U.S., but with other countries as well. So certainly from a defense perspective, there is some merit to some of this, what the Wall Street Journal calls candid talk. But at the same time, if you look at trade, for instance, where the Germans are saying, look, we're creating so many jobs in the U.S., while at the same time, obviously, there is a lot of import and export between the two countries, they really felt that that part of President Trump's comments were quite unfair to them.
Right. Yeah, Fred, I should add, that Wall Street Journal piece also said Mr. Trump's lack of basic knowledge about the economics of trade is dangerous. So it wasn't all complimentary.
Yeah, we know that the biggest exporter of cars from the United States happens to be a German company that employs thousands and thousands of people, and German automakers employ 100,000 people or more in the United States. What does this all mean for Europe and by extension the U.S. in terms of that remark from Angela Merkel if it were to play out in policy, Fred?
Well, I think it certainly will play out in policy, but I'm not sure how big the long-term effects are going to be, Christine. On the one hand, Angela Merkel said she was committed to the transatlantic alliance, but at the same time she said right now with this White House in place, it really is unclear to the Europeans where they stand. So one thing that I think you will see is you will see a lot more orientation by European countries towards themselves, towards strengthening European ties, especially now with the Brits also leaving the European Union. You'll see that axis of Paris and Berlin really trying to deepen their relations. And at the same time, I think you'll see countries like Germany, but also France as well, really trying to up their cooperation with Asian countries as well. The Germans have been doing it for a long time. They actually have, strangely, a pretty balanced trade with China if you look at the monetary value of things. So that's already been going on, and it certainly seems as though they could boost that a lot if indeed they feel that the U.S. isn't reliable anymore.
Interesting. Frederick Pleiken, live for us in London. Great insight. We really appreciate it.